Hi everyone and welcome to today's Premier Sports Network discussion. And today we've got a good one. We've got two industry experts talking about, well, a very specific and very complex issue, but between them they've got pretty much 60 years experience in the industry. Today we're going to be talking about security of major sporting events, and I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by Chris Sanchez and Scott Stewart, who are Vice Presidents at TorchStone Global. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me today. Let's just start off with, a nice simple question, shall we? Tell us a little bit about TorchStone Global, why it was formed, and the work that you guys specialize in.
Yeah, Anton, hey, I appreciate you having us, and thank you very much for including us in this discussion. TorchStone was created about 11 years ago, approximately 11 years ago, and it's basically a risk mitigation company. What we look to do is kind of help clients, as they're looking at their security platforms, what can we help them do to better their security mindset as they're building out their programs, whether it's an executive protection side, the intelligence side, doing assessments, whether risk related, threat related. How can we help these clients, better perform from a security standpoint? And so our motto within TorchStone is, what can we do before? What do we do in advance of an incident or something that may take place that we can help that company kind of deter from?
Okay, so that's really interesting. So let's talk about the specifics then. I suppose that's the broad stroke. So obviously, look, I can't imagine the security of sports events, of sporting arenas, of sporting facilities is a particularly easy subject. What are the biggest challenges? Obviously, you guys have been working on some huge events, including the Super Bowl and the last couple of Olympics.
Yeah, Anton, one of the things that we like to do in our approach to all security, right, is starting out and trying to be proactive, and that starts with intelligence. And that's kind of what my part of the company does here at TorchStone, is that we kind of do the analysis, and we try to, number one, identify the risks that are out there and the threats, quantify them, and obviously notify the rest of the security team and brief them so that they're aware of what's out there. And then, of course, we craft a security program that's appropriate to the threat that's out there. We don't want to create something that's just radically beyond what we need. So we really try to craft the program that is appropriate to that event, or to the threat that's out there. And so, for example, with sporting events, let's choose an example of say the LPGA, which is one of the clients that we're allowed to talk about. With the LPGA tournaments, we go in, weeks in advance and look at the tournament from an intelligence standpoint. So we're not only looking at the environment, what is the criminal risk there that could impact, the players or the employees? What is the terrorist threat in that particular location? We're looking at, what are there, going to be protesters or activists or other people who could cause issues. And then we look at what we call the POIs or persons of interest that might be pose a problem to either the event or to some of our athletes, because especially on the LPGA side, we do have a number of people who are very fixated on the particular golfers, but certainly that's not just limited to golf, right? Almost every sport, you just have these kind of over the top fanatics, and whether they're mentally disturbed or have other issues, they just become too much focused on the athletes. And so what we do is we put together a list of the POIs that might pose a threat in this particular area, and then we put out information, bio sheets, photos to all the security personnel so that they know what's going on. So what we're really trying to do is prepare the ground from an intelligence standpoint to allow us to be proactive, right? Because really what we're trying to do is identify early the threats and then avoid them, or at the very least mitigate them. Obviously, you can react, but we're really trying to avoid reacting if at all costs. We really want to, end the threat before it gets, to actually, being carried out. So we really do try to be very proactive, and that's kind of the whole concept of the business of before. But Chris can then talk about the other measures that we take kind of, during that large sporting event, after we have the intel component in place.
Yeah, Anton. So thanks, Scott. So one of the things that we always kind of look at is two of the biggest issues is complacency in the security platform. And when you look at, the sporting events that we have over here is, when you're looking at Major League Baseball games, you have 162 games per team, and it's, game after game, day after day. The NFL, not so much, because you're on a weekly basis. Hockey games, same type of scenario. You can get very, very complacent with your security, even though you do have a robust plan. It's something that you may have had in place for years, and you follow that template as you go. But we always kind of talk about, we kind of work with another major sports league here, and we kind of do some of their what we call quality assurance testing or red team testing on their stadiums. And it's all well and good on a Saturday or Sunday or for a major event, but when you're talking about a Tuesday afternoon, game, whether it's baseball, whether it's a Tuesday night hockey game, that's one of the big things is complacency, and then also just the lack of wherewithal of making sure that what is going to happen if there's an emergency. What teams are reacting, how are we going to approach this scenario, and who is responding to that scenario, whether it's first responders, whether it's security, whether it's just the director of security per venue. So those are the two biggest things that we kind of look at, and that we kind of see as the biggest issue. In talking about the LPGA and what Scott was, kind of discussing with intelligence, what we do, especially myself, and there's a group of four of us that travel with the tournament all over the world, is we'll take that intelligence and we do kind of a pre-advance about a month ahead of time before our tournaments, via email, via a video, whether it's Zoom or Teams. And we'll just have an initial discussion about, what expectations are, what we're looking at. We'll pass the intel that Scott has found onto the advanced personnel or the tournament personnel, as well as the POIs, the persons of interest list. And then once I hit the ground, our main job is to really coordinate with local security and local police, and make sure that the perimeter and the security assets that we have dedicated for that tournament are in place, that we have a plan, a robust plan, that there's an emergency action plan in place. And then once the tournament actually starts, it's a day-to-day briefing with these assets. And then my focus actually turns to players and caddies themselves during the tournament. So I rely solely on the assets that we have in place to do their job, just like they rely on me to do my job with the players and caddies. And then there's a constant discussion. Like I said, every day to the tournaments, we talk, we discuss plans, we discuss any issues that happened the day before, and we discuss one or two what ifs. If this happens, how are we reacting to it? If this happens, who's reacting to this? And that's how we kind of go about the business of handling the LPGA. And the LPGA is a little bit different monster than what we talk about with teams in a specific stadium that play at a home stadium week in and week out. But the type of communication and the discussions that we have from a security standpoint are the same. There's a standard.
It's interesting you talk about planning, you talk about personal links, you obviously talk about increase and being across all forms of new technologies in order to be able to monitor what's going on. But in order to be able to monitor what's going on, I suppose you need to be able to identify the threats, the risks, and how much have they changed? How much have they been added to over the last few years? Because I can think it's almost an unquantifiable list of things you have to look at.
Yes, Anton, it really is. And that's part of the challenge is not just looking at the problems that we had last year or the last decade, but really trying to forecast what's coming down the pipe. What new technologies are out there that either we can use to help us, and actually there are some fantastic technologies now that you can use, especially on kind of the intelligence collection, whether it's social media stuff to help you try to identify people that pose threats to our athletes. And there's some great platforms out there for kind of monitoring and tracking those individuals. But also on the threat side, we have to look at how and really wrap our brains around how the technology and the use of it is opening up our athletes and our venues to new threats. And whether that's athletes posting information on social media that poses a risk to them, And so, part of what we do is to try to educate athletes, to these dangers and to try to get them to more carefully, we understand that in this world, you have to use social media, especially if you're an athlete and you want to build your brand and obviously help your career, financially, you need to use social media. But what we're trying to do is educate the athletes to do so smartly and intelligently so they don't expose themselves any more than necessary. And then also on the other side, we're looking at new technologies and how they pose a risk, and whether that's a hack, to a venue or some of the systems at the venue, or whether that's something like a drone attack or some other new, threat or terrorist tactic that's come down that could be able to use to attack a stadium or the people coming to or leaving the stadium. So we're always trying to stay ahead of that. And kind of look where those trends are going and really examine what the threat is now. We're also trying not to hype it, right? That's one of the things that we don't, want to get, too far ahead with hyping things, because that doesn't help anybody. That's really not realistic. So what we're trying to do is assess the threat factually, accurately, because then that allows us to really craft the security program that's necessary to secure our venue and our athletes and even, the spectators.
It's interesting you mentioned terrorism there, and then when you think about sort of security around any event really, that's probably the main concern that people from outside the industry probably think about first. How much of a game changer was the events and a wake-up call in Paris 6 years ago now, and how much has sort of that sort of area, that threat changed, and how difficult is it to monitor?
Well, I mean, one of the good things is even in that case, right, in the Paris attacks, we had kind of an all-star team that was sent from the Islamic State Corps up to conduct those attacks in Paris and in Brussels. But even then, look at how limited their capabilities were as far as attacking that sporting venue. And really, we saw that the security measures that were in place were effective. They were able to keep that suicide bomber away from the venue. They stopped them from getting in. So really, in that case, we saw how limited the threat is, even of those sorts of terrorist attacks. And really, we saw a similar thing then with the Ariana Grande bombing there in the UK, in Manchester, the Manchester bombing, where the bomber was not able to get into the venue, and then so he had to kind of adjust his tactics to hit the crowd coming out of the venue, which kind of then became the vulnerability. So really, what we've seen is an expansion of the target set to these softer targets away from our venue. Now, certainly we're concerned of, somebody, somehow getting a bomb into a stadium, flying a drone into a stadium, something like that. But at this point, we really believe that's, going to be very difficult. And hopefully, if we keep our security teams on point, if we have a good security program in place, we can prevent that from happening. Given really what we call the terrorist tradecraft of these actors, and what we're seeing is that it's really not that good. They're not the supervillains that we see in the movies, okay, like Die Hard or something, where they're able to have this fantastical plan and all these weapons and everything. So they're really, what we're seeing, the threat from a realistic standpoint is it's relatively simple. And they tend to go and gravitate towards the softer targets, especially in places like the UK or the US, where it's harder for professional terrorists to get to. So really what we're worried about are, these attacks against the soft targets outside of our stadiums. That's really our primary threat. And of course, there are ways that we can work to prevent those from happening too.
Yeah, I remember sort of post Manchester bombings and the attacks in Tunisia as well, how the terrorism training we'd get before we went to a major event kind of changed, because it wasn't just what you do in the venue if anything happens. It's okay, what happens, because there might be people waiting outside, or there might be there may be many different exit strategies or hiding strategies or that kind of thing. So the training completely changed around it, which I find absolutely fascinating. But I suppose that leads us on to the next thing, which is kind of fan and staff safety. I suppose how much is that is built into the planning? How difficult is that? Because as you were just saying, it's not just in stadia, it's obviously around the surrounding area, which can be absolutely huge.
Well, and I'll jump in. I don't know if I'll wait and see if Chris has something to say, but just to jump in real quick, I think that staff and fans are really an important element of the security program. And the more that we can train our staff and the more that we can educate the public at large to be able to really identify hostile behavior as it's developing. It's important to understand that an attack just doesn't happen. It doesn't appear out of the vapor, right? It's the result of a process, a distinct process, and an observable process. So you're going to have surveillance of that venue before an attack. You're going to have the preparatory behaviors, as the attack is launched. And so people can see that behavior, they can report that behavior, and they can help to thwart attacks. And so whether that's our fans or whether that's the staff, whether that's our security team, really having these people educated about the terrorist attack cycle, what those behaviors are that are associated with it. And then, of course, knowing who to report to and how to report, what to report. So that education is huge, across society. And certainly as we've seen, in recent years in places like the UK, even in the US, where it's not necessarily, the hard targets that are being attacked by these people, but soft crowds. So we're seeing the Fishmonger Hall attack, in the UK. We're seeing these attacks, in the US against the Boston Marathon, for example. So, but they're going against these softer targets of people, but people can observe that behavior, can report it if they know what's going on and if they're educated. Chris, do you have anything to add?
So one of the things that stadiums really look at is, besides training their staff to help be part of the security platform, is when they're building out these security tendencies for the stadiums, whether it's baseball, football, football over in the UK, you have to look at how are we not only protecting our people, our stadium, but protecting the fans. And that's ultimately the key to this. And as much as I hate to say it, everything runs on money. We have to protect the fans, make sure that they're safe here at these stadiums so they can keep coming back. These are the people that keep the lights on, that pay the salaries, that help us grow as an entity or a sports team. So how do we protect these people? And that's where the technologies come in, whether it's the magnetometers and escalating the different technologies in those magnetometers. There's new versions of magnetometers that are coming out that seems like every other year. Doing what Scott does, monitoring social media, looking at tendencies in social media. What are we picking up that people are chattering about? And how do we discuss that in our daily briefings before each match or each game to help, kind of deter what we're seeing? So it really does look at, again, those three phases of protecting our staff, our people, protecting the stadium itself, but we have to protect the fans.
And how much does fan behavior and being aware of fan behavior play an impact in that?
Oh, it's huge. One of the things, and I can talk about.
We lost you again, Chris.
One of the sports leagues that I've worked with here in the past, with Major League Baseball, and not just Major League Baseball in itself, but different stadiums and different teams. With the enlarging of the security mindset and building these command posts, if you will, now that seems to be the norm in all of these major stadiums around the US. A lot of the technologies they're using now is kind of a camera system, a social media kind of system, to where now we can locate not only physically throughout the whole stadium, and we can look at every single seat within the stadium, but now we have motion sensors of maybe something that's not normal within the stands, that, hey, we can lock into from a camera standpoint. So the robustness of the security mindset, especially with these GSOCs or these command posts, it's been enormous for these teams and how they can start fighting or start looking at deterring a lot of the issues that they're having.
Sounds wonderfully sort of CIA and almost sort of Ocean's 11 kind of thing. But I suppose that just proves how important the adaptation and use of technology is.
Yeah, technology is huge, and it's really a weapon that's laying on the table. And are you going to pick it up, or is your opponent going to pick it up? And so you just can't be disarmed or unarmed in that fight, in the technology fight. And obviously there does it does raise up the issue of privacy It does raise up, the misuse of technology. But by and large, if people are coming into a public venue, like a sporting stadium, they don't have a lot of expectation of privacy to begin with. And so really, they need to understand that in this world, especially at the current time, the technology is really needed there to help weed out those threats, not just to the athletes, but to the crowd. And more, that's the way that we've seen it. There again, going back to, the Paris attack or the Manchester attack, those attacks weren't going after stars. They were going after the crowds, and the crowds were the target. And so that is important to protect them. And part of that is building out that technology to help, with the manpower to detect those threats before they can be manifested.
Interesting you mentioned privacy there, though, because obviously, some people will have questions about it, maybe feel uncomfortable about it. What's been the feedback from fans, from supporters, from users, from customers? Because I can imagine it's a difficult balance, because nobody wants to feel they're going through, let's say, too much security if they just want to go and have a good time.
Yeah, there is the balance there, and I think a lot of that also depends on kind of educating the public so that they know what to expect, so that they know what they can bring or can't bring to the stadium. Right. And certainly we've seen that changing over the years as far as, what sort of containers or bags you can bring. So really, helping to educate them about processes, about the security process really helps a lot. Of course, then that also assists in speeding up the process so that you can kind of get people through security more rapidly. And then that kind of helps at least limit the vulnerability outside the stadium. The faster you can process people in, the less of a crowd you have milling about outside the gates or the doors. So really, educating the people, helping them understand those expectations, and really helping them understand the technology that's being used and why. This is what, we're trying to basically keep you secure, keep you safe, so that you can enjoy, your favorite team.
I want to pick up on something you said earlier, Scott, as well about the new kind of threats when it comes to the actual sports people and people at the event through social media and online and threats and that kind of thing. So I can imagine that wasn't really much of a big part in what you do a few years ago. Now I can imagine it's quite a big part.
Yeah, it really has become a big part, and it's almost impossible to have enough analysts to do it physically, right? Especially when we're looking at a large league or a large team. So really, you do need to use these technology tools to help you. Of course, the tools are only as good as the team operating them. Is one of the things, and I mean, we've definitely seen some of our clients, who have invested a lot of money in technologies, but really haven't optimized them. And in that case, it's almost a waste. I mean, they're trying to do something, but they're not employing it properly. So it really is important to have, partners that can help you optimize those technologies for your venue and to serve the best purpose. But certainly, we've just seen this exponential growth of social media. And a lot of what we're doing right now is just trying to parse through that, winnow through it to get out the wheat from the chaff, and then to identify and assess, is this really a threat or is it not? Is this just some empty, and so there's a lot of an analysis that takes part there, not only from kind of a tactical point of view, but also from a psychological point of view. So for example, on our staff, we have a psychologist who helps us assess these threats to determine, how real they are, and how valid they are, and how concerned we need to be about them.
And I suppose that helps reassure the people actually taking part in these events, because anybody that sort of has any kind of following online, I suppose, feels quite vulnerable, and you don't want anybody feeling that way at any point in life, but especially when they're going into such a high profile, high pressurized situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to pick up on something Chris was saying earlier about sort of obviously the most important thing is looking after the fan, obviously from a personal perspective, but also from a financial perspective as well. But we are in kind of obviously more financially sort of delicate times, post COVID. So how much of a balance is it going to be as budgets are tighter for organisations to look into security when threats seem to be increasing?
it's funny because one of the things that we always kind of, laugh about is, especially with some of our clients, is when budgets get tight, security is the first thing to go. As much as I hate to say that, but it's the terrible truth of things. And for some reason, that's the first of the budgets that get through that have issues. One of the things that we see over here is that it's really not that they really do take a lot of stock into security, especially with dealing with stadiums. One of the things that we have over here, and I know I've talked about this in the past on other forums, there's what's called the Safety Act, Department of Homeland Security Safety Act, and there's a certain standard that a lot of these stadiums need to meet. So there's not really an option of decreasing security because they do have to meet this certain standard. But when you're looking at the bigger picture, it does make an issue for stadiums and for fans if they know what's going on and they know that certain teams or certain stadiums are cutting security costs. It raises an alarm. It raises some concern. And that's something that teams and stadiums need to look at and from a standpoint of, hey, what's going on with COVID? What's going on with our budgets? Are we having fans in the stands right now? Are we having half stadiums right now? What do we need to look at to not only protect what we have, but to really start looking also into the future? Once we get past this, fans start coming back, start attending these games and these concerts and these other events. How do we kind of rebuild what we let go and kind of meet that standard that we need to meet?
And Chris, you talked earlier about, obviously, look, the most important thing is to go through the intelligence, make sure you're fully prepared, but also you need to be reactive if anything does happen. How easy is that? Because if something happened in my home, I'd just call the police and hopefully everything would be sorted within a matter of minutes. You can't do that when you have thousands, tens of thousands of people at an event, when you have high profile people to sort of, to look after. So how easy is it to come up with a first, second, third response kind of plan?
Everything's preparation. We've talked about that. My background, I used to be with Secret Service, and what we did in the Secret Service, and like Scott used to be with State Department, is the actual protection portion of the Secret Service, and our main primary idea of protection was advanced work, preparation. And that's where you actually really do your security plan comes into place. So again, you start with your intelligence capabilities. What are you seeing from an intelligence standpoint? And then it's the practice. What are we doing when the stadium's closed? There's no fans there. You bring the staff in. What are we doing? How are we handling these situations? And we practice these scenarios. You practice with the local police, invite them in. Hey, what if we have an active shooter? What if we have a lady that's giving birth in the stands? Our first responders. Where's our EMT teams, and how do we react to that? And how do we move through the concourse that's full of people and get that person out to safety? So it's preparation. A lot of the stadiums do this. A lot of the teams, kind of walk through scenarios and talk about scenarios, but it really does start with the intelligence capability. What do we see on a daily basis as we're about to open our gates? And then, the preparation that we've done in the past will help us as we move forward to take care of the certain scenarios that are out there.
And that's preparation, which is obviously a huge part of what needs to go into an event. But when the actual event actually happens itself, how important is reassurance? Because one bad incident with somebody in security, or you see something bad happen to somebody else, can negatively set fans back for quite a long time, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing: it's one of the other things that we've always talked about in the security and the law enforcement world is we have to be right 100% of the time. The bad guy only has to be right 1%, that one time. And it's that one incident that can reverberate issues in the news, kind of break some confidence with fans and the security platforms of the stadiums. But when you look at the overall picture, what's in place and what stadiums and security teams have done, especially in the last 20 years, last 10 years, is incredible. Can we get better? Of course we can. We can always kind of evolve into what we're doing. But it's just one of those things where you have to pre-plan, you have to practice what you plan, and then put it in action if it does happen. Hopefully it doesn't, but when it does happen, you put your plan in action.
So let's talk about the plan then. So because I think a lot of people sort of watching this, listen to this, will probably think, okay, look, this is such a big topic. I wouldn't even know where to start if I was looking at security for a stadium, a sports team, an event. So when you sit down with a client, when you sit down with their organization, what are the bullet points? Where's the real start? What's the thing that people can almost look at from day one?
Yeah. So one of the things that we talk about is when we're talking with a client right off the bat, the first thing you really need is an assessment of what you have in place already. Let's look at the security plan you have in place, your personnel, your staff. Where exactly is everyone posted? What are their job descriptions? What is your intelligence capability? So it's really a robust assessment of what you have, and then we look at the gaps. What are you lacking? What do we need? What don't you need? And we have a discussion on that, and then kind of put a filler, if you will, of their security plan and said, look, you have this in place. You may want to also think about, implementing a social media monitoring capability during the game or during the event or during the concert. You may want to look at adding 5 more security personnel in these key areas. You may want to look at maybe reducing security personnel and putting a law enforcement personnel in that role. So there's different things. One of the, we're not looking at knocking the whole security capability down. We're looking at how we can enhance what they have, but also helping them be cost effective in what they're doing in that enhancement. So that's one of the big things. And actually that is the big thing that you do to start this is get an overall assessment of what they have. And then you help them build from there and fill those gaps that are needed.
And individually, is there advice you can give to people sort of, watching, listening this? Because obviously, look, we're talking about very specific sort of security specific examples, but anybody that works, I suppose, in this industry, I suppose, can do things, look out for things, help their colleagues in a way that they might not be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really starts with awareness. What part of what we're doing here, right, is making people kind of aware of security, but also really helping them understand that they are responsible, not only corporately, for the event or for the stadium, but also for their own security, and how, they fit in to, the larger security as a whole. And not only as an organization, but as a society, and how we all really need to take that responsibility to look out for each other. And certainly, in this current world, we're seeing more and more of that. And it works. I mean, people, we're poking fun at this idea of see something, say something, but it's effective and it works. And, many attacks have been thwarted because of people just merely reporting what they see. So really that awareness is where it starts, but then also having a knowledge of what to do. How do I respond in this situation? And whether that's as a fan or as a staff member, that may differ. But whether that's getting training on emergency first aid, when we look at these attacks, whether it's a vehicular assault, a knife attack, a shooting attack, bombing, most of the casualties are from loss of blood. They tend to bleed out. And so really having the training to be able to what we call stop the bleed. Having, part of your plan, obviously, for your venue has to be having the resources in place and the stop the bleed kits. So in case, somebody is injured, and then having your staff know how to use them. But people themselves also, should be trained and understand, things they can do as far as, using a makeshift tourniquet out of their belt or shoelaces or something else to stop that bleeding, to stop that person from dying. So there's a lot that people can do, education wise to get themselves to the point to be able to, not only take care of themselves, their families, but really the people around them.
I've done that training, and it's exceptionally terrifying, but it is a wonderful, wonderful skill to have. And it does make you feel more assured when you go to these events. And it really does help. It makes you feel so you can hopefully take care of somebody if the worst ever happens. And I suppose the big thing is, look, the world of security seems aloof, a bit scary, but I suppose the advice is just to ask. ask for help, ask for a bit of advice, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a big, and of course, from the security side, we need to kind of breach that divide, and make ourselves accessible, and make it so it's less scary and less Hollywood, if you will, and more practical. And I think that once people are equipped, once they have a better understanding, that really puts them in a good place. I mean, we have clients that'll be like, well, I don't know if we want to do active shooter training because we might scare our employees. But when you actually go and talk to the employees, they appreciate it. They're like, well, we know that this is a threat, especially, in America with the access to guns. We know that there's a threat there. So it's reassuring to us, number one, that the company's thinking about it, but then number two, that they're, helping us and equipping us to be able to respond, to save ourselves and others. So really, having that attitude as an organization to security, and really, investing in your people, in your employees, in athletes, and bringing them up to where they need to be and equipping them can actually be just a very beneficial thing, for your organization.
Scott, Chris, I've got one question left. What is the one thing, the one bit of advice, the one thing you want people listening, watching today to take away from this? One thing they can do in the security world and they'll make a big difference going forward.
For me, it's self-awareness and pre-planning. Just know what you're doing before you go, and just be self-aware while you're there.
Yeah, and my point would be very close to that. It's really just understanding what the threats are out there, not panicking about them, but then just understanding that you have the responsibility to help safeguard yourself, your family, and your community, your company.
Absolutely. And if anybody does have anything they want to bring up, any questions they have, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'm sure Chris and Scott would love to help, even if it's just conversation, get a conversation started, because like I said, it can seem like a completely different world, but we all know how important it is. Chris Sanchez, Scott Stewart, thank you very much for joining us today. I really hope it's been enlightening. I've been fascinated anyway, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Anton.